With the release of EX7 Digimon Liberator, and I'd argue BT17 too, the Digimon TCG has pretty clearly entered a new era in its competitive history. The game, frankly, has never been more complex, interactive, and creative. Honestly, if you were thinking about playing for the first time or coming back after a long break, this is the time to do it. With a webtoon literally based around the TCG, the floodgates have been opened for developing interesting new mechanics and a ton of new Digimon too. But of course, before you can enjoy all of that, you need to start somewhere. So I'm kicking off a new series where we'll explore decks that make a great introduction to the game in the Liberator era. We'll cover one in each color, definitely more on the beginner-friendly side, and we'll wrap things up with a couple of unique decks that transcend the color pie. First up is the color red, and while he's not a Liberator himself, I think that Gallantmon is a great place to start. In the Digimon TCG, red is the color of big power, big damage, and deletion. Red cards often focus on buffing DP to punch through everything in sight, dealing multiple security checks in one swing, and deleting anything that might be standing in your way. The color has also started experimenting with effects that deter the opponent from blocking your attacks, as well as effects that reward you for dealing damage to the opponent. While not always a top-tier color, Bandai does show it a lot of love, and as a result, there's usually a couple of viable red decks kicking around in every format. It's also one of the more starter-friendly colors because the effects are fairly straightforward, often revolving around attacking aggressively, and its generic staples tend not to be too expensive. Gallantmon really embodies a lot of what it means to be a red deck, and as a fan favorite from the Digimon Tamers series, it has received a lot of support over the years. The deck is basically a deletion machine, aiming to leave your opponent's board empty by the end of every turn, and embodying pure aggression through its ability to attack after your turn has effectively ended, thanks to cards like EX2 Tocado. Gallantmon is also one of the more affordable decks to build as of BT17, since its reliance on expensive secret rares has been greatly reduced by the latest round of support. All of that said, Gallantmon is far from a perfect archetype. It has received a ton of support over multiple sets, but that support tends to be incoherent, often reinventing what the deck wants to do every time. Gallantmon has gone from being a bruiser to an OTK deck, then Warp Digivolution Toolbox, then a mill deck, and now it's all about swinging at high numbers with immunity to effects in the weird space between turns. Lacking conventional forms of protection and being reliant on a single stack most of the time also makes it a much more fragile deck than much of the competition out there. That fragility is somewhat patched over by its ability to warp Digivolve from Rookie to Mega pretty consistently, but the setup involved can be asking for a lot at times. And while it is pretty cheap for the most part, the deck really wants to play a couple of copies of BT13 Gallantmon, a secret rare that will run you anywhere from $30 to $50 Canadian depending on the market conditions. You can get by without it, but its absence noticeably lowers the ceiling of the deck and definitely reduces your ability to mount a comeback in tight spots. Here's a pretty straightforward and beginner-friendly list that you can use to get into the game. As far as decks go, this is pretty reasonable, coming in at around $150 Canadian to build. The two secret rare Gallantmons are of course your biggest purchases, and again, you can swap those out for something else, maybe BT12 Gallantmon and a copy of Gallantmon X Antibody. Your next most expensive card is the deck's finisher, Gallantmon Crimson Mode Ace, which will run you roughly $10 a pop. This variant of the deck leans into Warp Digivolution and swinging with protection into the opponent's turn. BT17 Gallantmon is your workhorse, popping most level 5s, and with the right inheritable skills, even level 6s. And while you're at 0 or less memory, it gains immunity to enemy effects. In practice, that immunity is basically limited to when you are attacking with the Blitz conferred to all of your Growlmons and Gallantmons by EX2 Tocado. Crimson Mode Ace lets you blow up boards, but more importantly, acts as your win condition. Once you and your opponent are a bit later into the game, your trash counts should be pretty high, especially if you're deleting their Digimon and milling them out. Crimson Mode Ace will then let you trash security proportionate to the size of your combined trash piles, often letting you clear 2 to 3 security cards before its actual attack connects for game. Each of your Tokado Tamers play a crucial role, with EX2 Tokado allowing you to essentially play into the opponent's turn and mess with the memory gauge as you clear their field. BT12 Tokado is a much needed memory setter and lets you warp from Gallantmon into Gallantmon by tucking itself alongside a Growlmon and War Growlmon into Gallantmon's sources. And then there's BT17 Tokado, who nets you an extra memory at the start of your turn for having one of your Gallantmon line in play, and actually lets you warp Digivolve in a similar fashion as the BT12 one, except that you can only do that warp at the end of the turn. To facilitate the warp plays and your Crimson Mode closer, we run a mill core of EX4 Black Growlmon and EX3 War Growlmon. These both fill trash piles while letting you set up your own pieces, crucially, playing out Tamers and allowing you to recur resources when your stack does get answered. BT13 Gallantmon also relies on a high trash count, though it's more of a comeback card than a finisher. You can actually hard cast this Gallantmon pretty easily, assuming that your field is empty and that there are a decent number of cards in the bin. He reduces his cost by 2 for every 5 cards in the combined total of both players' trash mins. 5 in the trash makes him an 11 cost, 10 makes him a 9 cost, etc. You can often play him for 3 or less, taking advantage of his rush skill to attack right away. This card is also a walking board nuke, since it can pop a 6000 DP Digimon on play, when digivolving, or when attacking, none of which are once per turn. And if its effect can't delete a 6000 DP or less Digimon, it just nukes a 13,000 DP or higher Digimon instead. You can see why this card is so expensive. Lastly, Gallantmon, like many decks these days, relies on a consistency core of training options and memory boosts to find its pieces and extend its plays. These cards have both become ridiculously cheap thanks to recent reprints, help you find just about everything you need, and since they are entirely generic, you can use them in just about any other deck of their corresponding color. So, good pieces to pick up. As a red deck, Gallantmon actually has a lot of tools that let it play surprisingly well into most of the color pie. It tends to do well into green, yellow, and purple, while having a fairly neutral matchup into black, and pretty poor matchups into blue and red, funny enough. Green decks tend to spam the board, providing a lot of fodder for your deletion effects, so Gallantmon usually gobbles them up. Yellow decks are grindier, often recovering ad nauseum, but Gallantmon can simply mill them out or burn their security away with a well-timed Crimson Mode swing. Purple decks live and die by filling their trash with cards, so as long as you're careful about when you mill them, and again, time your Crimson Mode Ace plays, you should be laughing. Black decks often have a lot of trash setup, like purple, but black is also a color with a lot of resistance to deletion, so Gallantmon can struggle into them. But if you can't kill them outright, milling them out is always an option. Blue decks tend to get the better of Gallantmon because they are faster and tend to be tamer reliant. Without any Digimon on board to delete, it can be hard for Gallantmon to make progress. Meanwhile, blue players can just wait and blow you out in a flurry of consecutive swings once they have set up. Other red decks tend to be faster than Gallantmon as well, and while BT17 Gallantmon is a blocker, it loses its protection when the opponent's turn actually starts, which means it can be blown up pretty easily. The more competitive decks in EX7, like Imperial Dramon, Fenrilugumon Takemi Kazuchi, and especially Dex Dorugoramon, will all give you massive headaches as well, even when your matchup should be theoretically favorable into some of them. Speed is honestly the main issue with the former two, with Gallantmon actively helping Takemi Kazuchi hit its big OTK turn, while Dex Dorugoramon's ability to resist deletion and then de-digivolve you back is pretty rough, not to mention its ability to delete your Tokados. Mirage Galgamon is also brutal, since they can just farm resources while hiding in the raising area and then come out and kill you in one turn. But Into most Tier 1.5 and Tier 2 decks, you've got a decent matchup spread, especially once you start to understand how to play for consecutive warp plays. Gallantmon is also extremely oppressive for a lot of Tier 3 and for fun decks, since its admittedly patchy support is still more than enough to deal with a lot of one-dimensional strategies. And I think the last thing to say here is that, look, it's not impossible to win a regional with Gallantmon. Literally one guy has done it. But the deck does reward dedicated players, and in the right hands, can definitely get you to top cut or win your locals. And when it finally gets some coherent, busted support, hopefully in BT19, things will get absolutely nasty for everybody else. Okay, and that'll do it for Red and for Gallantmon. Next time, we'll be checking out what the color blue has to offer in the Liberator era. And if you think you know which deck I'll cover in the next video, leave your guess in the comments section down below. And if you're a seasoned Gallantmon pro, please share your builds and tips for any new players looking to pick up in the deck in the comments as well. I will catch you all in the next one, and until then, peace.